In the dust-choked summer of 2147, the American West was a battleground. Climate collapse had turned forests into tinderboxes and rivers into cracked earth. Overpopulation squeezed humans and wildlife into ever-shrinking pockets of habitable land, and the truce between man and beast had long since frayed. Apex predators, bears, wolves, mountain lions, now raided garbage dumps and livestock pens, while humans retaliated with drones and electric fences. The air buzzed with tension, as if the world itself held its breath. Dr. Emily Carter adjusted her respirator mask and crouched in the brittle grass of Yellowstone's northern range. Her gloved hand hovered over a portable console, its screen flickering with data. For years, she'd obsessed over one question. What if we could talk to them? Not just observe or dominate, but truly converse. Her team had dismissed her neural interface project as folly, but today, she proved them wrong. The device strapped to her wrist emitted a low hum, translating the harmonic frequencies of nearby wolf howls into digital patterns. A pack had been circling her camp for days. Gaunt, desperate creatures with eyes like smoldering coals. Their alpha, a silver-furred male with a jagged ear, watched her from a ridge. Emily called him Kale, though she doubted he'd appreciate the name. She tapped the console, broadcasting the sequence of tones. "We don't want to fight," the machine intoned, its synthetic voice echoing across the basin. Kale stiffened. His pack fell silent. Then, a response, a guttural howl, rising and falling in a pattern Emily recognized. The console decoded it, then stopped stealing our land. Her breath caught. It wasn't poetry, but it was a start. Back at the research outpost, Emily replayed the recording for John Harper, her pragmatic Texan colleague. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "So a wolf told you to piss off. What's next? A bear demanding a timeshare." Emily ignored the sarcasm. "This isn't about territory. It's about survival. They're starving, John. So are the farmers shooting them on sight." John sighed, rubbing the scar on his jaw. A souvenir from a grisly encounter years prior. "You really think a chat over supper will fix this?" "It's a beginning," she said, "unless you'd rather keep arming poachers." Outside, the wind howled like a wolf. Somewhere in the dark, Cal's pack was listening. The next morning, Emily returned to the ridge, her boots crunching over frost-laced soil. Cal stood sentinel, his pack fanned out behind him like shadows given form. She hesitated, then deactivated her perimeter alarm, the last line of defense between her and 40 razor-sharp teeth. John, monitoring her vitals from the outpost, crackled over her earpiece. "You're insane, you know that. One flick of his tail, and they'll swarm." "Then let's hope he's in a diplomatic mood," Emily replied, though her pulse betrayed her calm. She activated the translator and held out a slab of lab-grown venison, a peace offering. Cal's nostrils flared. He advanced, each step deliberate, until his muzzle nearly brushed the device. "Why come unarmed?" The machine translated, its voice metallic yet eerily deliberate. Emily swallowed. "To show we can trust each other." The wolf's amber eyes narrowed. "Trust is earned. Meat is truth." He snapped the venison from her hand, swallowing it whole. His pack watched, tails low. As Emily relayed the exchange to John, a twig snapped behind her. A younger wolf, Nia, she'd later learn, crept forward, her pelt matted with old wounds. She nudged Emily's pack, dislodging a protein bar. When Emily tossed it to her, Nia retreated, tail flicking in what might have been gratitude. Back at the outpost, John stared at the footage. "So the big guy's a philosopher, and the runt's a thief. Great." Emily smiled faintly. "It's a start." The deal came together in fragments, like stitching a quilt from rags. Emily sat cross-legged on the parched earth, the translator humming between her and Cale. Behind her, John fidgeted with a drone remote, its camera trained on the wolves. "We'll reopen the migration corridors," Emily offered, pulling up a hologram of Yellowstone's fractured ecosystems. "Reconnect your hunting grounds." In exchange, your pack keeps others from attacking settlements. Cal's lip curled. Our old trails are paved. Your kind builds faster than we can run. Then we'll tear up the roads. Emily tapped the hologram, dissolving highways into green corridors, and provide synthetic meat, enough to sustain your pack. Nia whined, her gaze fixed on the protein bars in Emily's pack. Cal silenced her with a growl before turning back. Words die. Meat doesn't. John snorted. You're really gonna trust a wolf's handshake? Emily shot him a glare. It's not a handshake. It's a covenant. The first test came at dusk. A rogue grizzly, drawn by the scent of synthetic meat, ambushed a nearby farm. Cal's pack intercepted it, driving the bear into the newly restored wildlands. The farmers, armed with rifles, lowered their weapons as the wolves retreated, howling triumphantly. That night, Emily hosted the pack's inaugural dinner. She laid out lab-grown bison steaks under the stars, while John reluctantly passed bowls of hydroponic vegetables to the wolves. Nia sniffed a carrot, then sneezed, sending John into a startled laugh. Cal tore into the bison, blood staining his muzzle, but paused to nudge a chunk toward Emily, a gesture older than humanity. So, John said, watching Nia bat at a fallen leaf, when do we admit this is the weirdest thing we've ever done? Emily smiled. When it stops working. But as the fire dimmed, Cal's eyes met hers, sharp and unreadable. Trust, she realized, was a meal best served one course at a time. The Montana sky burned amber as humans and wolves gathered at the edge of the restored wilderness, the air thick with wood smoke and unease. Emily had insisted on simplicity, a long wooden table draped with wildflowers, synth meat roasting over open flames, and bowls of hydroponic greens. John stood stiffly beside her, his Stetson low, while Cal's pack fanned out around the clearing, their postures wary but curious. Nia, ever the diplomat, approached first. She sniffed a platter of lab-grown bison, then glanced at John as if daring him to laugh. He tossed her a chunk of meat, and she caught it midair, her tail wagging, a motion so dog-like it disarmed the crowd. A murmur rippled through the human onlookers, some clutching rifles under their coats. Cal, however, refused to sit. He circled the table, his gaze lingering on an elderly rancher named Clara, who'd lost 2 sheep to his pack the prior spring. Your kind burns the earth, he growled, the translator relaying his words. Your meat smells of labs, not life. Clara, her face weathered as the plains, met his stare. And your kind took my livelihood. But here we are. She slid a plate of roasted roots toward him. Eat, or don't. But don't waste my time. To Emily's relief, Cal sat. As twilight deepened, the feast unfolded in fits and starts. A wolf cub gnawed on a drone part, mistaking it for bone. A teenager named Liam, tasked with serving drinks, spilled water on a sleeping cougar. Its annoyed hiss sent him stumbling back. Emily translated a tense exchange between John and a grizzly bear matriarch, Anya, who demanded fishing rights in a reclaimed river. But the true test came when Rick Voss, a poacher turned reluctant guest, arrived late. His eyes locked onto Nia's mangled ear, a trophy from a trap he'd set years ago. She bared her teeth, a growl rising. Emily stepped between them. This is exactly why we're here, to end this. Rick spat into the dirt. You think a bunch of wolves'll forgive a bullet? You're dumber than you look. Cal rose, his snarl vibrating through the clearing. But Nia, unexpectedly, nudged Emily's hand. He's one of many, she translated, her voice softer than her alpha's. Let him eat, or starve. Rick paled but took a seat. By midnight, the fire had dwindled to embers. Emily sat beside Cal, her shoulder brushing his coarse fur. This won't fix everything, she murmured. No, he rumbled. But it's a tooth in the trap. A beginning. In the shadows, Rick Voss pocketed a knife, its blade glinting. The pact held. For a week. It began with a severed fence. Michael Torres, a third-generation rancher from Wyoming, found his cattle grid torn apart at dawn. His prized Angus bull lay dead, throat ripped open, and the tracks around it were unmistakably cougar. Syrah, the tawny mountain lion who'd negotiated with Emily months prior, had struck. Emily found Michael pacing the carcass, his face flushed beneath his cowboy hat. "You said they'd honor the deal," he barked, kicking a bloodied hoof. "Your fences cut off our den." Syrah's translator growled as Emily activated the device. The cougar stood on a bluff, her two cubs peering nervously from behind rocks. "Your cows wander where our kids hunt. This is justice. Justice." Michael spat. "That bull fed my kids." Emily stepped between them, the wind whipping her hair. "Michael, the treaty says you have to maintain the wildlife corridors. If your fences..." "Screw your treaty." He yanked a rifle from his truck. The shot cracked before Emily could react. Syrah's cub yelped, collapsing in a spray of blood. The aftermath was chaos. Syrah's mournful roar echoed for miles, rallying predators from the surrounding wildlands. By nightfall, 3 ranches were ablaze, and a pack of coyotes had slaughtered Michael's remaining herd. Emily's calls went unanswered. Cal's wolves were nowhere to be found. John found her at the outpost, trembling with rage. "You can't fix this," he said, gripping her shoulder. "Not every wound heals." "Then we bleed with them," she snapped, grabbing her translator. The moon hung low when Emily led Michael and Syrah to a makeshift fire pit in the canyon. The rancher's hands shook as he clutched his rifle. Syrah's fur was matted with her cub's blood. "I didn't mean to hit the cub," Michael muttered, staring at the flames. "Just wanted to scare her off." Syrah's eyes gleamed gold. "Your fear smells like death. You take. Land, water, life. And you." Michael shot back. "You're no better. You think I don't know hunger. The droughts killed half my crops. My boys leaving for the cities 'cause there's nothing left here." The cougar's ears flattened. "My cubs starve too. Your fences block the deer. Your guns kill our mates." Silence fell, heavy as the smoke. Emily held her breath. Then, slowly, Michael lowered the rifle. From his coat, he pulled a photo, his son grinning beside a withered cornfield. "He's 16. Says I'm fighting ghosts out here." Syrah nudged a hare carcass toward him, its throat slit cleanly. "Teach him to hunt," she said, "or we all become ghosts." At dawn, Michael dismantled his fences. Syrah's cubs returned to the den, limping but alive. But as Emily watched them retreat into the wild, she spotted movement in the trees. Rick Voss, filming the exchange with a smirk. The fractures, she realized, went deeper than trust. By 2148, the world had learned to eat differently. In Alaska, Inupiat elder Mara Kinuedwak shared smoked seal meat with a polar bear named Nanook, their breaths visible in the Arctic air. "Your kind used to shoot us on sight," Nanook's translator growled. Mara passed him a chunk of blubber. "Your kind used to drown in our traps," she replied. They laughed, the sound brittle as ice. In Florida, retirees sipped mint juleps on screened porches, while alligators sunned themselves in driveways. Teenagers filmed wolves chasing down delivery drones, their laughter echoing TikTok trends. The media dubbed it the Dinner Friend Pact, a hashtag that trended alongside memes of raccoons stealing barbecue sauce. John Harper, still skeptical but begrudgingly invested, built a feeder station outside Yellowstone. Nia, now Kel's second-in-command, frequented it, her mangled ear a badge of survival. One morning, she nudged his coffee cup with her nose. "You want a sip?" he grumbled, pushing it toward her. She lapped it up, then hacked up a hairball on his boots. "Charming," he muttered. Emily monitored it all from her new office in Bozeman, where holograms flickered with reports of cougars napping in Seattle alleyways and bison reclaiming highways. But data streams couldn't capture the quiet shifts. The rancher who left out deer carcasses for Syrah's cubs, The school kids in Wyoming who petitioned to rename their football team the Grizzlies instead of the Wolf Killers. Yet fissures lingered. In Wyoming, Michael Torres rebuilt his herd, but now branded calves with a paw print insignia, a nod to Cirrus terms. At night, he left shotguns unloaded by the door. Trust, he told his son, is a muscle. You use it or lose it. But Rick Voss, now a shadow in the background, photographed it all. His feeds buzzed with conspiracy theories. Lab-grown meats laced with chips. They're replacing our God with wolves. Emily blocked his messages, but the fear was real. One evening, Cale appeared at her cabin, his fur dusted with snow. Your people are still afraid, he translated, nosing her laptop. Emily closed it. So are yours. The next morning, a video went viral. A toddler in Colorado offering a grass-fed burger to a grizzly. The bear sniffed, then licked her palm. Comment sections warred between awe and outrage. Emily smiled. Progress, she thought, tasted like rare meat and cold coffee. The warning came too late. Rick Voss had always been a ghost, slipping through cracks in the pact, bribing rangers, selling predator pelts on the black market. But this time, he'd outdone himself. Emily found Cale at the edge of the restored wildlands, his fur matted with burrs in desperation. Lyra's gone, he translated, his voice a guttural snarl. Your kind took her. Her blood chilled. Lyra, Cale's mate, a wolf whose diplomatic calm had smoothed countless clashes, had vanished 3 days prior. Tracks near her den led to tire treads, melted snow, and a single feather from Rick's signature hunting cap. John traced the coordinates to an abandoned Nevada warehouse, its walls lined with illegal shock collars and gene splicing kits. Inside, Lyra hung suspended in a reinforced cage, her sides heaving. Rick's henchman had fitted her with a neural tap, siphoning her biological data for bioengineered pets. Weapons down, John barked, his drone swarm buzzing through broken windows. Emily lunged for the cage, but Rick intercepted, a syringe glinting in his hand. You think this pack's permanent? He sneered. Predators are just meat with teeth, and you're their fool. Cale's howl shattered the stale air. The pack swarmed, teeth sinking into flesh and steel. Emily fumbled the cage lock, catching Lyra as she collapsed. But the syringe fell. Its contents, a neurotoxin, already coursing through Lyra's veins. They buried her at Yellowstone's heart, beneath a gnarled pine. The pack circled, their howls harmonizing into a dirge. Cale nuzzled Lyra's cooling body, his rage silent. Absolute. You promised safety, he translated, eyes locked on Emily. I didn't, she began. Lies. He snapped at the translator, shattering it. John grabbed Rick's collar, hauling him toward the grave. Apologize. Rick spat. For what? She was already dead the moment you trusted her. Cale lunged. Dawn found the pack splintering. Packs across the west abandoned feeder stations. Syrah slaughtered a dozen sheep in Wyoming, leaving Michael Torres' ranch in flames. Emily's calls to Cale went unanswered. In the ashes, Rick Voss grinned, filming the chaos. Told you, he whispered to the camera. Nature's a war, and we're done playing nice. But as he uploaded the video, a shadow fell across his screen. Naya stood behind him, her mangled ear twitching. Your war just began, her translator growled. They buried Lyra at twilight, her grave marked by a cairn of stones and shattered circuitry. The latter a grim joke from John, who'd salvaged Rick's surveillance gear. Humans and predators alike gathered at the Yellowstone Valley, the air thick with the scent of pine and grief. Emily laid a wreath of dried sage and wildflowers on the cairn. She was our bridge, she said, her voice raw. Beside her, Cale stood rigid, his muzzle streaked with ash. Nia pressed against his side, her mangled ear a silent testament to their shared history. Michael Torres, his hands calloused and steady, stepped forward with a cedar plank. Carved into it was a wolf's profile, flanked by mountain ranges. For the land, he muttered, planting it at the grave's head. Syrah, the cougar, dragged a freshly killed deer to the cairn, a predator's tribute. John, uncharacteristically solemn, lit a fire. Flames licked the darkening sky as the assembly shared stories. Lyra's role in negotiating the Summit Valley ceasefire, her patience with skittish ranchers, the time she'd swatted Rick's drone from the air with a well-aimed rock. Cale hadn't spoken since the warehouse. When Emily approached, he turned away, but not before she glimpsed the wet glint of his eyes. Later, as embers faded, Rick Voss's body was found at the warehouse perimeter. His throat bore puncture wounds, clean, precise. Naya stood vigil over him, her growl a low thrum. "The pack dies with traitors," her translator intoned. Emily knelt beside Rick's corpse, her fingers brushing his cold wrist. "This isn't justice," she whispered. "It's balance," Naya replied. At dawn, Cale vanished into the wildlands, his pack trailing behind. The feeder stations sat empty. Sarah's cubs no longer prowled the ranches. In Bosman, Emily packed her lab. The translator's screen cracked and dark. John found her loading crates. "You really quitting?" "I failed," she said. "Lyra's dead. The pack's unraveling. Maybe it was always a fantasy." He tossed her a protein bar. Then why's Nia still guarding the valley? 3 days later, a video surfaced. Cal's pack herding elk away from a reoccupied wolf sanctuary. A drone captured Nia sitting beside a Montana highway, directing traffic around a den of wolf pups. The caption read, "Dinner Friend 2.0. Emily watched it on a diner screen in Wyoming, her coffee cold. Maybe trust, like grief, wasn't a destination, just motion. The Interspecies Congress convened in the skeletal remains of Denver, its skyline half reclaimed by vines and herds of bison. Delegates arrived under storm clouds, human diplomats in climate-controlled suits, predators padding through ruins, their translators humming like cicadas. Emily, her wrist device upgraded to parse a dozen species vocalizations, stood at the podium. Behind her loomed a hologram of Earth, its continents etched with migration routes and conflict zones. "5 years ago, we spoke in howls and bullets," she began, her voice echoing across the plaza. "Today, we speak in treaties." Cale sat at her side, his fur dusted with ash from Lyra's grave. To his left, Syrah groomed her cubs, now nearly full-grown. Anya, a Siberian tiger whose territory spanned the reclaimed Alaskan pipeline, stretched lazily, her stripes rippling. The crowd murmured, human farmers, wolf packs, even a delegation of electric blue genetically engineered ravens from Seattle. A man in a tailored suit, Senator James Hale of Colorado, rose. "This is madness. You'd let wolves dictate land use. Let bears claim rivers. And you'd let your children starve for oil." Anya's translator purred. The crowd erupted. John, now Emily's unofficial bodyguard, leaned close. "This'll get ugly." It did. A rancher from Texas brandished a photo of his son, mauled by a panther. Syrah countered with footage of his hunting dogs poisoning dens. Cale growled through a retelling of Lyra's death, silencing the room. Emily mediated, her voice fraying. "We're here to stop the dying." The turning point came at dusk. Naya, her mangled ear a banner, approached the podium. "You ask why we trust you." Her translator echoed across the silent crowd. "We don't, but we're tired of graves." She tossed a slab of synth meat to a wary coyote pup. Its mother had been shot weeks prior. The pup sniffed it, then ate. By midnight, the accord took shape. Shared sovereignty. Migration corridors would be sacred, enforced by both drones and predator patrols. Blood debt. Poachers' sentences would be served in predator-protected wildlands, rebuilding what they'd destroyed. The feast clause. Weekly communal meals, mandatory for all. As delegates signed, a paw print here, a retinal scan there, Senator Hale scoffed. "And if we renege?" Anya's smile was a scythe. Then we eat first. Outside, Emily found Cale staring at the Denver skyline. "This won't fix everything," she said. "No," he rumbled. "But Lyra, she'd have liked the pup eating." In the shadows, a figure filmed the proceedings. Rick Voss's protege, already plotting. But for now, the world held its breath. 2160. Emily Carter's porch overlooked a valley where wolves napped in sunbeams and solar panels glinted like fallen stars. At 72, her hair was silver, her hands mapped with scars, but her eyes still burned with the fervor of a woman who'd once bargained with wolves. Cale was gone, his spirit woven into the land. His grandson, a lanky wolf with Lyra's calm eyes, now patrolled the corridors. Beside him trotted a grizzly cub, Anya's descendant, already fluent in human sign language. In the Dakotas, Syrah's cubs had become mediators, their paws as likely to nudge open a ranch gate as to pin down a trespasser. Michael Torres's son, now a biologist, tracked their movements with a mix of pride and awe. "They're better at borders than we ever were," he told Emily once, his father's old rifle gathering dust in the barn. The feast clause endured. Every Sunday, towns hosted cross-species potlucks, synth meat for predators, heirloom vegetables for humans, and lab-grown fish for the coastal delegates. Teenagers filmed cougars sampling vegan lasagna. Elders traded stories with raven diplomats. Even the skeptics softened. John Harper now kept a jar of emergency kibble by his porch for Nia's great-granddaughter, a one-eared wolf with a penchant for poker. Yet shadows lingered. Rick Voss's protege, a smirking opportunist named Cole, had resurfaced, peddling predator-proof tech to nervous settlers. Emily monitored his feeds, her jaw tightening at the rhetoric. They're biding time. The pact's a leash, not a bond. But the new generation had its own language. One evening, Emily watched as a human child, no older than 6, offered a chunk of synth deer to a wolf pup. The pup sniffed, then licked the boy's palm, a gesture Cale had once reserved for Lyra. That night, Emily sat by the fire, her journal open. "We built this world from howls and hope," she wrote. "Not perfect, not safe, but alive." A weight settled beside her, Cale's grandson, his fur warm against her leg. Outside, a coyote howled a lullaby. Emily smiled.